Hey everybody, I'm Amanda with DevExpress and welcome to today's webinar, DevExpress Reports in Client-Side Web Apps, presented by Web Program Manager Mehul Harry. In today's session, Mehul shows you how to leverage your XtraReports and deliver them to a client-side web application. This helps you to get the best of both worlds, server-side reporting and client-side viewing. FYI, this session is being recorded and it will be made available later on our DevExpress YouTube channel. We will also do a live Q&A at the end of this presentation. Just type your questions in the GoToWebinar control panel at any time throughout the broadcast. All right, thank you so much for joining us. I will now hand things over to Mehul.
Thank you, Amanda. Welcome everyone to how to display reports in a client-side web app. And today I'm going to show you how to achieve this. And I call it XtraReports, DevExtreme, and Magic because what I'm going to show you is not a new product, but it is a solution that we've provided you. I know many of you are asking, hey, you guys are doing so many new things with client-side technologies. We'd love to see more of the reporting on the client side as well. So let's just quickly talk a little bit about that and what actually we'll cover today. So the agenda for today is pretty much how do you get XtraReports on the client side? Well, I'm going to be taking a sample that we created called T370591 and I'm going to break it down for you. We're not going to talk exactly too much about, the sort of how things are handed off technology-wise, but how do you achieve this? So we're going to recreate that sample from scratch and tell you exactly what you need to understand about that sample to get reports working on the client side, meaning how do you display them on the client side. And then finally, we'll talk about what's next and we'll jump into the Q&A. So pretty much everything I'm going to show today is going to be a lot of code. Now, as I mentioned, a lot of what I'm going to show you for XtraReports is possible because of what we've already been working on. Now, XtraReports, if you remember several releases ago, we produced a client-side report viewer. So if you take a look at any of our ASP.NET demos on our website for XtraReports, you'll notice this excellent report viewer. Now, this we introduced many releases ago, as I said, and this allows us to show you reports on the client side, and that's because it uses certain technologies for knockout and so forth. And we've also got our client-side report designer and all that good stuff. So what we're going to do is we're going to leverage this. We're going to reuse this and show you how to take that technology that's part of XtraReports and then incorporate it into a completely client-side app. Because what you see here is pretty much a server-side control. So the reason most reports happen on the server side is because the report is generated on the server side because the data is on the server side typically, and you need to combine that data and so forth. And then so what happens is we generate that report on the server side. So even though XtraReports is still a server-side technology, we provide a client-side viewer so that once the report is streamed to the client side, it can be displayed. And so to provide a solution, what we did is, again, take specific classes from our XtraReports to display them. So what I want to talk about next is what you need in order to use this T370591 sample is a specific license type. Now, before I get into this sample, I want to talk a little about everything that we've provided, not just in this sample, but I've got a little GitHub solution that I'll be talking about as well. But a lot of what's necessary, for example, is some things like this web document viewer. Now, this is a specific class and JavaScript and code that is used by the reporting package to display it on the client side, and we're going to leverage that. But in order to use this, you got to make sure you have access to a license of DExperience that provides access to source. So if you don't, you can just go to devexpress.com and contact our client services. Now, the reason for this is because these are some high-level items that are necessary in order to use this. All right, with that out of the way, let's talk about the example. As I said, this example is a self-contained sample. Now, if you're not familiar with our support center, we have a a whole category of examples that we create to show customers how to do this. And when I say self-contained, they are running solutions. So for example, if you click download, it will download what's called a zipped version. Now, it won't say .zip, it'll say .ds example. And if you have this example runner installed, what it will do is it will essentially, if you have one of the compatible versions installed, what it'll do is it will download this entire sample, convert it, meaning the references and so forth, for the DExperience version that you have installed, and then you can just hit F5 because it has everything you need, the database, the references, and everything that you need. But this sample was created to show you specifically how to display the HTML5 document viewer in a DevStream application. So let's explore this sample first. So I've already downloaded this sample, so let me just open it. Now, when you download these examples, you'll notice that they get stored inside of your Visual Studio Projects folder. So if you go to your documents and take a look at, I believe, samples. So wherever your My Documents are stored, and you can choose this folder. When you're first installing that example runner, you can decide where they get stored. But inside the samples is where we restore. So for example, I've got a MVC report, and I downloaded a couple of versions of this, but I've got that exact sample already loaded. Now, I have everything exactly the same as that sample, except for one thing, which I'll mention. So the first thing is when you open the sample, it's going to look for SQL Server Express Local DB 2012. Well, I have 2016 installed, so it's just giving me a warning. So I can ignore this warning. And once I do, it's going to open it up. Now, within there, let me just close some of these tabs. Within there, I've got two projects. I've got a DevExpress app, and I've got a MVC widget viewer demo. And so this is the server-side solution that allows us to display a couple of reports. And in those reports, I've got some data-bound items. So this is used as a web service for hosting our reports, and DevExpress will be the client-side app that's going to talk to this service and say, hey, listen, I want to show this report. I'm a client-side app, whether I'm mobile or whatever. I'm out there and I want to display this from the server side. So let's take a look and see exactly what's happening. So the first thing is, let's set this as the startup project. And if I run this in the browser, you'll see that it's going to simply say, hi, this is a backend service for the web document viewer. So, hey, listen, I'm just a local service. There's really nothing to see here. And so if I said now the DevExpress app is a startup project, and let's run this, what it's going to do, it's got, it's looking for, let's put it default.html. It's looking for essentially, it's just got some DX widgets on here. So this is essentially T37051. And so what it does is it exposes a couple of reports. Now, this is the completely client-side app, and it knows on the server side exists two reports. One is an orders report, and I can get it using a standard call to the MVC web service or a web API call. And when I hit open report, it's going to query this service, and it's going to display this report. And what's great is I've got the full client-side report viewer. That means I can do things like I can do a search on here. So for example, if I'm looking for tofu, it's going to tell me, hey, I found all these items, and it's going to take me directly to those pages if I need. And I can set export options, or I can print it. I can zoom in if I want, or I can even zip through the pages, as well as export to a number of different options. Again, fantastic XtraReports viewer that I now have taken out from XtraReports and made available in a DevExpress app. So how is this possible? Well, let's dive into that and see exactly how to leverage this ourselves. So to do this, I'm going to refer back to this sample quite a bit. And what I'm going to do is I want to recreate this. So let's open up a new instance of Visual Studio. Now, even though I'm going to make this from scratch, I'm not going to make this sample available later because it's completely a derivative of T37051. And so I want you to use the T370591, but I'm going to recreate it so you can see exactly what we did to create that sample. All right, so the first thing is we're going to start by creating a new solution and a new project in there, and we'll make a server-side solution for our reporting to create that. Now, to use reports, we need several references. Now, the very first thing is, let's call this XtraReports, I don't know, client service demo. Okay, so now we're going to call this the report service. It'll be the web service that delivers the reports. Now, what project type you use here does matter. Now, I can use one of the standard Microsoft ones. If I do, I'm going to need to add several references for XtraReports. Or I can use the DevExpress template gallery and leverage that, because this will add all the references for me. So I'm just going to use this template gallery. So I'll hit OK. And now I'm going to choose ASP.NET, and I'm going to select empty MVC web application. And when I hit create project, it'll bring up another wizard. So I'm not really going to put any user interface. Again, this is a service, report service. So I'm simply going to use it to deliver extra reports. Now, under MVC settings, I'm going to leave everything else pretty much the same. It doesn't really matter what theme, because again, I'm not going to put any user interface items in here. I'm not going to use any DevExpress MVC controls. In fact, the only thing I'm going to do is set up the suites. So because I'm not going to use any UI widgets, I'm going to remove all the options here, but I will select reports, charts, and maybe a couple of the dashboard items. And the reason for this is because it's going to add the references I need for reports into this project type. And the other items I can leave standard. So now, once I hit create project, it is now creating for me an ASP.NET MVC 5.0 project type for a solution, which we will use to create one report. Now, in the T370591, we actually have two reports, and that one shows off how to deliver two reports and how to choose between the two reports. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. But this project type gives us essentially a very blank project. So as you can see, I've got no views. I have a shared project type, a layout page, but I actually don't have a home view or any controllers. But what I do have is the necessary project references to use web, MVC, XtraReports, and so forth. So that's great. So what I want to do now is actually create a base home page. Now, I said I'm not going to use it for that, but I want to give the user some fair warning that, hey, listen, this is a reporting service, and it's not really meant for you to add anything. So the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a controller. And if you're familiar with MVC, you know convention, by convention, it looks for something called the home controller. So I'm going to just create a home controller real quick. And when I do, it's going to scaffold for me a very basic controller with a default index view. Now, this view doesn't exist. And because I created a home controller, it created a home folder under views for us. So now I can create this view. I can right click and say add view. And I'm going to create a empty view. It's not going to be data bound or anything. Again, I'm not using this to display any views. So it's going to be empty, and it's going to be based off the layout page. Now, when I create this, it's created for us a base index page, and we're going to call this report service. We can call it extra report service to be specific. And we'll just say, hey, nothing to see here. Move on. And that's just a message to the users. Hey, this is just a service. I'm not really here to do anything. You can't really interact with me here as a user interface. Okay, so with that said, if we just take a quick look at this in the browser, just to make sure, because we created a new project, we got to make sure our references are right and so forth, you'll see that all it's going to tell our end users right now is, hey, listen, I'm just a service, and I have nothing to really display here. All right, so that's great. Now, let's actually create a report that we want to deliver to the end users. Now, to do that, I'm going to leverage my local SQL Express. I've got some data in there. So the first thing I want to do is, because this is a completely empty solution, I want to add a connection string in here. Now you can add your connection string any which way you want. And I'm going to use the same name, nwind connection string. Now, this is the same name that we use in the other sample. As I mentioned before, in the T3705991 sample that I have downloaded locally, you'll notice because we had that message initially, because I have a local database in here called nwinDB. This is SQL local DB looking for SQL Express 2012. I said, hey, I've already got Northwind in my SQL Server Express 2016, so I had it point to my SQL Express instead of using the local version. So I just made that same exact string. Okay, so that is essentially the first thing I want to do, add a connection string that the reports can look for and bind to. Now, speaking of reports, what I want to do next is actually create a folder. So now I'll right-click on my reports project and create a new folder, and we'll call it reports to get very fancy. And in it, we're going to create one report. So let's add, now here I can come in here and say new item or something like that, and it'll bring up another wizard. But we actually see, as you'll notice, we have something in here called add DevExpress item. So I can actually use this context menu, and I can say new item again. But as you see, we made it easier and added the extra report wizard web for you right here. So I can give it a name here, something like customers or something. I'll just leave it called extra report 1. I can choose the type. I can say empty report, data bound, and so forth. I'm going to select data bound. And I'll select database here, and I'll select the Northwind connection string that I just added to my web config, and we'll create a query here. Now I can actually build a query. So as you can see, these are all the tables that I have available to me. So I'm going to select customers, and I'll select something like customer type, company name, and city, and maybe phone. Okay, so I've got the 4 fields that I'm really interested in, and I'll just select next. And now it asks me, hey, what do you want to make available in the report? And I'll say all of them. Now, the first thing is, how do I want to display these? So I'm just going to say, let's start with city, and then maybe phone, and then maybe company name and customer ID. And then we'll select next, and I can choose the layout type, and as well as what the style will be. And then I can give it a title like customers. And when I hit finish, it's created for me a brand new extra report. And again, it's given me layout, it's given me the data bound fields, and we can see this by clicking the preview tab. And once I do preview, I have all of my data coming across. So again, it's fantastic. Within a minute, we've just created a new report. Now, if I run this again, will I see that report? No, because we haven't created any view with a report viewer, and we're not going to, because our job in this is we want to show this off in a client-side app. So what I want to do instead is create a service, create a web API service to display this. So to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new controller that we're going to use from the client side to call this. So if I right click and hit, I'm going to say to my controllers here, I'm going to create a new Web API 2 empty controller. And the difference here is for the controller name, first of all, I'm going to call it Web Document Viewer Web API. This is the same exact name. As much as possible, I'm going to stick to similar names that you're going to see inside of the solution here, T3705991. And this Web Document Viewer is actually a class from XtraReports that is used to display web documents. Okay, so we've got the name, and once I do that, I scaffold it. Now, the key difference from home controller derives off controller. A API controller derives off API controller in MVC 5. So what we want to do now is start leveraging this. Now, if you remember at the beginning slide, my title said DevExtreme, XtraReports, and Magic. Now, the magic part is we're going to make XtraReports do all the heavy lifting, meaning that because we've already got that capability built into that product, we want to say, hey, listen, I don't actually want to manage the process of what report they ask for and how to package it up and deliver it to the client side. XtraReport takes care of that for us. So we're going to leverage that. Now, to do that, we're going to reuse code from the sample. So to do that, let's go back to our sample here and take a look at this controller. Now, in our sample here, we actually have two controllers. And the two controllers, one of them is a standard controller, and the other one is a Web API controller. I'm only, in my sample here, I'm only going to recreate the Web API controller. And you can recreate both if you want, but in essence, the heavy lifting is the same. And we're gonna take a look at exactly what this code is doing. So I'm just bringing in the code. So the very first thing it's going to do, it's going to say, hey, listen, I don't understand what this manage module subscriber is. Again, this is a class. So if I let Visual Studio tell me, hey, listen, you need to bring in this using clause from XtraReports, and it's going to go further and say, hey, I don't know what this iDocument viewer is. So we're going to bring in that item as well. And finally, it needs one more reference, and that is, if we hit control dot here, web document viewer. And now we've got all the items that we need. Again, this is also in the sample, but in essence, what we're doing is we are creating, first of all, something called request processor. I got a variable called request processor that is of type that supports the web document viewer request manager interface. So if I hit F12 here, you might say, well, what exactly is this? Again, this is part of the native controls from XtraReports that does the lifting that says, hey, when I get a request from the client side for a specific report, here's how I'm going to take one of the XtraReports, package it up, serialize it, deliver it to the client side so that client side viewer can display that. Again, it's all done for us. Now, so we're gonna leverage that. So as you can see, I've got two calls here for get and post, and they both do the same thing. Besides a setting for cores here, which just says, hey, if I get a request from a domain that is not my own, allow it. And so again, you can set this up in many different ways, and likely you can set it up in your web config and all that kind of stuff to restrict what domains come in and all that. But what's important here is the request processor. The request processor, we're simply forwarding the request that comes in, either in the get or the post, to the request processor. It handles the request for us. So that's important. All right, so now we have a controller. We have an API controller that can handle that for us. Now, there's one other thing we need to do, and that is to set up the global ASAX. So if we go into global ASX, inside the app start, there's a couple of things we need to do. Now, the first thing is, because I'm not going to be using really any of the DevExpress MVC widgets, I can actually delete this code that says, hey, I don't actually have the model binders. I'm not going to be doing the callback stuff. If you want, you can comment it out, delete it, whatever you want. But one important call that you will need is to initialize the web document viewer class. So here, I've got a static initialize call in the document viewer. Now, it doesn't know what it is, so we need to make a call out to using DevExpress Web MVC. Now, again, if you are concerned about what is, if you're gonna take this route that I'm showing you, there's other items in this project that you can actually comment out. So if you take a look at the layout under shared, the layout page, you see I've got some items in here for style sheet. So I can actually comment these out as well because I'm not really using those as well. Okay, so we've got the basics of what we want out of the server side. So if I build this again, as it stands, I've got pretty much a brand new service. So now let's create a client-side app to display this. Now to do this, I'm going to right-click on my solution here, and I'm going to say Add New Project. Now this time, I know it's going to be a client-side app, so I'll call this Report Viewer. Now, for this, I can actually use one of the DevExtreme templates because I know I'm creating a client-side app. But instead of using DevExtreme or a DevExpress project type, I'm going to use a very empty ASP.NET web application. Now, it really doesn't matter because whatever I put in there is going to be only a client-side app. And the reason I'm using this project type is to show you what it takes to use DevExtreme from scratch. So to do that, I'm going to use the ASP.NET empty web application template because it's as empty as you can get. So as you can see, I'm not using any references and no authentication, nothing, completely empty project type. So I'm going to hit OK here. And what it's going to do for me, it's going to create for me essentially a very blank. I've just got some system files here with and a web config, but really nothing else. And let's close all of these documents here, and we'll set report viewer as a startup project. And now I've got nothing in here, but I want to use DevExtreme. So if I come in here, the very first thing I probably want to do is, as you know, in a SPA application, single page application, you need at least a single page to begin with. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new page. So we're going to right click in here and say add HTML page. And we can call this index.html or default, whatever you want to call it. So I've got nothing in here. So to begin with, what I need to do is add references to use DevExtreme. And not just DevExtreme, we need those extra report classes as well. So to do this, you can actually come in here, right click in here and say manage NuGet packages. And then, you can search for DevExtreme, and it's going to say, oh, there's DevExtreme. And, there's all sorts of stuff out there I can bring in and start and then add references to the script tags. But, we made a lot of this easier. Because in the original sample for T3705991, by the way, this version actually is going to be updated, but I'm showing you this older version for a reason, and that's because initially in this sample, for this sample, what was necessary was certain files. You needed certain files like this DX Designer and DXAll and Web Document Viewer, and you needed certain CSS files and so forth. And we said, you know what? Why make it so difficult for our existing customers? Let's make it easy. So that's what we did. So if you go to GitHub, and if you look under DevExpress, we've actually got like a ton of projects under there. We've got Test Cafe, all this kind of good stuff. But we just put up yesterday a brand new one called Bower XtraReportjs. Now, this essentially packages all of the same files that I mentioned that you need. So if you've got all the web document viewer, and the reason for that license requirement that I said earlier is because these are some high level files that are only part of those higher level packages, and you want to make sure that you have that licensing. And again, we try to make that clear that says, hey, you do need it. Even though this is on GitHub, not everything on GitHub is it's source open, but it's not really free. Means that, yeah, you can look at the source, we want you to use it, but, please definitely, you're going to need a commercial license. All right. But that said, this gives you our HTML5 document viewer and the end user report designer for our ASP.NET extra reports. So to get started with it, you need something called Bower, and you just got a simple command called extrareportjs. And you might say, well, wait a minute, I don't have Bower. How do I get started? Bower is actually really easy. So for Bower, yes, there are some plugins for Visual Studio. I actually tend to prefer the command line interface. So whatever command line you want. I'm just using something called conemu. This is nothing fancy. You can download it. You can look up Scott Hanselman's blog. He's always raving about these utilities. But in essence, this is just command line. You can open up PowerShell and do the same thing. But if you don't have Bower installed, you can actually get Bower using something called NPM. And you might say, oh, Mehul, you and your terms for package things. You know what, guys? I actually have a webinar in 2 weeks where I'm going to be talking about modules and packages and all this good stuff. So join me for that. Hopefully I'll be a little bit more specific about those items. But because this webinar just deals with reporting, let's stick to that topic. All right, so to get Bower started, if you have Node installed, then you have something called NPM installed, which is the Node Package Manager. If you don't, just go to Node.js, download Node, and it'll give you access to this thing called NPM. And we can actually use NPM to install. So I can say NPM install Bower, and I recommend using the -G switch, which is the global switch, which makes it accessible from other paths as well. So when I do this, it goes out to the Node repository and figures out, okay, let me go and grab the latest Bower and install this. Now I actually have Bower installed, but it's going to install it again as well and make it available for me in another path. And that's because I actually keep my Visual Studio projects on a separate drive. So here, as you can see, I put it in my app data, roaming folder, all that good stuff. Now, when I go to D and I go to projects, I can actually access Bower as well. So if I hit Bower, it's just going to say, hey, what do you want me to do? But as you can see, I've got Bower installed. So now, let's take a look at that project that we've got so far. So if I go to my Visual Studio Projects folder, again, I keep it on my D folder. And as you can see, we've created this new service, XR Client Service Demo. And instead, in here, we've got 2 items. And I want to go into this report viewer. So here, let's just copy this path, and I'll go in here. And now, what I want to do inside here is I want to use Bower to install this XtraReportjs sample. And that's because this has all of the necessary items that I need to display reports on the client side. So now, if I just copy and say Bower install XtraReportjs, not only will it get the necessary files for XtraReports viewing, but because it's reliant on something like DevExtreme, it's going to download DevExtreme. But DevExtreme itself relies on something like jQuery and Globalize. It's going to figure out what those items are and download those as well. So watch this. When I hit this, it goes out to the repository and says, oh, okay, yeah, I see that. It's there available on Git. I'm going to download the files that it needs. But this project also needs access to DevExtreme, which it doesn't have. So I'm going to go out and grab DevExtreme. And DevExtreme is relying on, again, as I mentioned, Globalize, jQuery, jQuery UI, CLDRJS, Knockout. You know, DevExtreme is very smart. It doesn't try to reinvent the wheel. It uses existing great technologies. All right, so as you can see, it was smart enough to not just get the existing files, but all the necessary files for the necessary projects. And these are projects that are out there on their own repository. So it goes out and figures all this out for us and grabs those items. Now, if we come back to our report viewer, we're not going to see any folders. So we have to hit show all files. And when I do, I've got a folder here called Bower Components. So let me right click and say include in project. And once I do, it's going to grab that. Now, when you include in project, you may get this warning. It says search for TypeScript typings. Do you want to go get this NuGet package for TypeScript typings? I'm going to say no. And I'll explain what that is. If you're familiar and you've used TypeScript, you probably already know what that means. DevExtreme supports TypeScript. So under Bower Components, not only did it get the XtraReportjs files that we need, but it got jQuery, DevExtreme, Globalize, all that good stuff. And if you look under DevExtreme, there's a TS folder, and this is the TypeScript folder. Now, I'm not actually going to use this TypeScript folder, so I can actually right-click and delete this. Now, if I just hit compile, if I let that TypeScript in there, and if I try to compile this right now, you're going to get all these weird errors for TypeScript in that TypeScript folder. So for now, I'm going to remove this. And we'll just delete that. So now I can compile this. And I can compile this because I'm not actually using that yet. So let's start using this. And to do that, we need to add references in our folder here. So to do that, I'm going to add several references. So the first and foremost is I'm going to bring in a reference to the web document viewer. So if you look under web Bower Components, XtraReportjs, under HTML, you see I've got this web document viewer. Now I can bring this in, but it's going to make a link as a link, and I don't want to do that. I actually want to use it as a script, and yes, you can actually refer to HTML as script, and this is the main file. So if you look at this file, this is what's doing that heavy lifting. You can see it's doing a lot of knockout to data bind items from the server side, and you can see it's got a lot happening in here, but this is actually what builds that client-side report. So we're going to make a reference to this because this is what is actually going to leverage and build that report for us. And this actually has links to a couple of CSS files as well as JavaScript files. So the next thing I want to do is I want to bring in some style sheets for DevExtreme. So you can, what's great is come in here, start pulling these items in individually, and I can do that. So what I want to do is I want to show you that we've done this for you. And if you take a look at DevExtreme app, if you take a look at this default HTML file, you can see we've got all these links here for you already. So to save some time, I'm going to simply pull a lot of these script files in for us. So let's come in here and simply add those links. And as you can see, I'm referencing Bower Components, DevExtreme, CSS. I'm using the light theme. I need the common theme as well. And the same thing for the web document viewer, I'm using the light theme. I can use the dark theme if I prefer, but for now I'm using that. Then I've got a reference to jQuery and jQuery UI, Knockout, Globalize, CLDR.js, all the necessary items. And then the heavy stuff. I've got the DX all. Now typically, again, DX all is only available to customers who have that higher license bracket. So we want to make sure you guys have that, as well as this designer file, and again, the corresponding document viewer JavaScript file. Okay, so now we have the script files. So if we take a look at this in the browser right now, we won't actually see anything because we're just referencing this. So what I want to do is let's recreate that same interface that we have in this sample. So what I want to do is I want to take a look and bring this in. Now I want to show you there's really nothing fancy happening in here. So why don't we just bring that in and recreate that? So the first thing you'll notice is I've got a div and something called custom toolbar. But really inside the div, all I've got is 3 DevExtreme widgets, a checkbox, a dropdown, and a button. And all they're doing is just doing some data binding. So after that, I've got another div here that is actually the report viewer. Now this, we're not gonna touch this at all. This is what the web document viewer is using to display that. This is where the report preview comes in, and the report toolbar will be instantiated for us. It's all sort of self-contained in there. So we're not going to touch that all. We're simply going to have a message that says, listen, you need a capable browser, at least an HTML5 browser, to display that. All right, so that's great. Now, if I take a look at this right now and I try to run this, I'll probably get an error. So I want to actually show you this. So now where I run this, the first thing it tells me, hey, listen, I don't have HTML5 browser. And I'm like, well, wait a minute, I do have it. I'm using Chrome here, so what's going on? Well, what's going on is there is a particular file that this web document viewer needs, and that is the Initializer GS file. Now, if we take a look back at our initial solution, one of the files that you'll see in there is called this Initializer GS, and this is the file that sets up the key settings. So actually, I'm going to just copy and recreate this in our sample as well. So if I come in here and I'll put let's create a new folder in here, and I'll call it content. You can call it whatever you want, scripts. I'll just call it content. And in it, we'll add a new JS file. So let's add a new JavaScript file, and we'll call it Initializer JS. Now, we're just going to paste the same code in here. And let me call this initializer with a lowercase to just keep with the times and make sure I spelled it right as well. All right, so now we got Initializer JS. We need to have a reference to it as well. So I'm going to put this right after I create this. So I can just drag and it'll generate the reference for us. Now, when we create this and take a look at this in the browser again, Initializer JS has set up the key items for this. And now, as you can see, I've got the report preview here. But as you can see, my items here don't quite look exactly like they did in the previous version. And that's because I've got some custom CSS that I've created in that previous sample. So if I take a look in this previous sample, you'll notice in there, under content, I've got something called site CSS, and I've just got some items for height, width, and padding that I just want to recreate that as well. So let's just add another file here. I'll right click and I'll say style sheet. We'll call it site CSS, and we will just paste in some of these styles here and add a link in here as well. So now we have essentially all of these files that we need to set it up. Now, we are pretty much ready to go. But if I try to run this right now, you'll know that it's looking for orders report. It's gonna say, hey, server side, I need something called orders report. And it's going to try and grab that. But if you remember, when we created our server-side report service, we don't have orders report. We simply have something called XtraReports 1. So let's make sure our client side is smart enough. So where do we do that? Well, we manage that in Initializer GS. So Initializer GS allows us to set up, first of all, where we're going to query. Where is the web service that we're going to query this for? Now, this could be on Azure or Amazon, wherever you're hosting your web service. We're gonna let our client-side app know this is where you're going to go and look for the XtraReports web service. Well, because this is local, I can specify this. So to figure out when you're testing where your report server is, I can actually right-click on this project type in Visual Studio, select Properties, and under the Web selection, you'll see a listing here for the specific item. So this actually tells us what port it's going to run this on. So I'm just going to grab that port number and we'll update this in our Initializer JS so it knows where to look for it. And the second thing is I've also said what the available reports are here. So the first thing is I don't have 2 reports, so I'm going to remove one of them. And the second item is it's not called order reports. It's actually just called XtraReport 1. So I'm going to rename this, and my text matches my value. So I'll leave those two exactly the same. Now, if we run this, the report, our client-side app is now smart enough to know where to go query that. So if I run this and I say, hey, give me XtraReport 1. And as you remember, I only made a web API service, so I'm going to select the checkbox. And when I hit open report, it's going to try and call the service and grab that report. Now, luckily, the service was running. But if your service isn't running, it's going to show you an error. It might show you a little error here. So I have one last tip for you to show you how to make sure your service is running. And to do that, what we can do is I can set up, as you saw, I set up the report service, but I can actually set up the both projects to run at the same time. So for example, if I right click on the solution and select properties, because these are sort of codependent on each other, I'll say, hey, set up multiple projects. I want to set it up so the report service starts as well as the report viewer starts at the same time. And I can even go further and can right click on the report service again. And under properties, instead of going to a specific page, I'm just going to say, you know what, don't open any page. This is a service. Just wait till I get a request from the client-side app. All right, so I can save all of this now. And if we go back, before I run this, if we go back and I close these tabs to show you, now when I hit start, it starts my report service and it starts my report viewer at the same time, but it doesn't open a tab for the report service. It's going to wait until I select an item, make a call out, and then report makes a call out to the service, and then it's starting up the service now because it got a request and it's generating a report. It's grabbing and binding the data on the server side, that extra report, generating the HTML, and then serializing it, sending it back to our client side, and then we're able to display that. And again, we have all the same great features that we did with the regular XtraReports. I can zoom in, I can export, I can do searching, and so forth. And I want to point out one last thing in the reports that you have available to you in that T370591 sample, and that is we had the capability to display 2 reports. So how did we handle 2 reports for XtraReports? Well, in the T370591, in the server side, in the global ASX, we actually specified one extra call, and that was a report resolver. And so if you notice in the models, we have this custom report resolver. So if you go to custom report resolver, all it does, it says, listen, when I get a string from the client side, and this is that process, it's used by that process request, and it just sets up a variable called report that says, listen, based on what report they want, it could be the order report or the product report. So you can take a look at T30591 if you have multiple reports to figure out which report they requested and which report you're going to deliver. And because in our case, we only had one report, I didn't need this report resolver. And I didn't need to specify in the client side. So as you saw in my version, I made it very simple. But again, T370591 shows you everything you need to get started to deliver those reports. All right, with that, let's go back and just discuss this Bower package. The Bower package is out there. It's available. It's going to make your life so much easier. And all you need to do is call Bower install XtraReportjs as I did here. And then you will have everything you need. Just make sure you're in the project that you need so that it can install all of those items properly. And once you do, you saw it was just a matter of referencing those libraries to display those items. Now, finally, I want to mention to you, you can find this sample by going to devexpress.com/example equals T370591. And please, again, if you don't have the right licensing, contact us and we'll help you figure it out. With that, let's talk a little bit about plans. What is the future? Well, people keep asking us, why don't you make client-side reports? I think this is actually even a better solution. XtraReports is available for multiple platforms, meaning if you've got reports on WinForms, if you got reports on WPF, ASP.NET, those are all available and they can be used and delivered. So if you made reports from WinForms, you can use them on ASP.NET. And reports really, we feel, is kind of a server-side solution because they got to bind to data, right? So we feel XtraReports is already there. It has a client-side viewer. It has a client-side designer. So does it need to be somehow binded on the client side? I don't know if that is necessary because, again, you can use it on the client side. So, right now we're listening. If you've got some scenario that tells us, hey, this needs to exist, tell us why. Because as you saw, you still need to make some kind of web service that makes a call out to your server to get the data and all that stuff. So again, reports, I think is a fantastic solution. You can bind them with charts and display them. As you saw, all the reports that you have available can be delivered now on the client side. All right, with that, I'm going to pause and let's address questions. Amanda, how are we doing on the questions?
Hey, Mehul. We've had a couple come in that the guys answered on the back end. There is one that's popped up here. How does this extra report handle large data like 1 million records?
Oh, that's a good question. It can handle it in essence fairly well, but it really depends, I think, on your your database, your environment, how many fields are you displaying, what's in the reports, right? So the more complex the report, the heavier, the longer it could take. If you just got one field and you're displaying some number, it could be very fast. So it really depends. And for some kind of specific questions like that, we ask that you actually just give it a test. And when you do, even if you don't have XtraReports today, you can actually, we have a free 30-day trial. You can actually contact us, our support team, and they'll help you figure it out. So if you're finding like, oh, this 1 million record scenario that I tried against my database is taking too long, let us see it. Maybe we can help you. So it's a very specific question that depends on the user environment.
Richard's asking if we know how much the licensing for Bower.js is.
Sure. And so what Richard is asking is, what does it cost? Well, Bower is free. Bower's free, Node is free. This is actually out there. This is public information. And so the reason I keep stressing it about the licensing is because this is all out there, yes, anybody can use it. But the point is, how do I say? We're all developers, right? We're a development company. And at the end of the day, right, how do I put this? There are certain things that are absolutely community supported. If you saw the webinar on Tuesday, we introduced Code Risk for Roslyn. And Coders for Rosalind comes in a couple of flavors. One is community supported. It still costs a little bit of money, but it's a significantly less than cost. And that's because it's supported by the community, right? Meaning that you don't have access to the DevExpress support team, which answers your questions in 24 to 48 hours, that can, look at a customer solution and all that good stuff, right? And that's why, and it's not just support. Your commercial license helps pay for creating new products, new features, new functionality. And so that's why I said this, is that our company right now is based off of certain licensing and so forth. And again, if there are some smaller projects like jQuery, which is fantastic, community supported, right? And so I think both models work. And in certain scenarios, it just depends on what is right for you. So what I meant is, you can actually everything I showed you today, you can use. We simply ask that if you are using XtraReports, that you have a version of DevExpress DExperience that has access to source. And if you're not sure which one does, you can go to devexpress.com and click on products. And if you compare features and pricing here, we've got this fantastic grid here that shows you which of these has access to source code. And so you've got DExperience or Universal. Of course, people always ask me, hey, why do you always recommend Universal? Because one, it has everything. You get priority support, all that good stuff. So contact this. We have live chat people, salespeople that can answer questions for you about all sorts of licensing, pricing, all that good stuff.
Great. From Chuck, do report arguments or criteria present any hurdles when using this client viewer? I'm guessing the parameters would get passed into the report server.
Yeah, great question. So let me go back to T370591 and let's run this. So let me set this as the startup project. I'll run this, and then let's run this. The answer for you is it's all handled for you, Chuck. And now let's go here, Control F5. As you saw, I didn't show in the initial one, but if you take a look, this T370591, there's orders report, which we saw, and there's also product report. When you run the product report, you'll notice the first thing it does is, hey, listen, I've got a parameter. So the client-side report viewer handles this for you. It's telling you, hey, this thing is based off of a couple of parameters, whatever they are. And then once I submit that, it's going to go back, talk to the server, and display that. So again, magic. It's handled for you, Chuck. So trust it. It's good stuff, and it'll make your life easy. People keep asking about ASP.NET Core. So the answer is yes. It works with ASP.NET Core, but which part are you asking about? So if you're asking about this client-side version, yes. As you saw, it's all completely client-side. DevExtreme there is not actually using anything. Now, if you make ASP.NET Core and you want to use the DevExtreme MVC wrappers, go for it. You can absolutely do that. And I'm a big fan of ASP.NET Core. If you look at my blog, that's what I've been talking about lately. ASP.NET Core this, ASP.NET Core that. And just yesterday, I talked about 16.1.5 is out, and the MVC wrappers for ASP.NET Core are available. So reporting is a part of it's not part of DevExtreme. It's part of ASP.NET, ASP.NET MVC 5, and so forth. ASP.NET Core is using DevExtreme MVC wrappers, and so that is available, and that you can do file new project on and so forth. So again, it all depends. If you're talking about the client-side app, you can use DevExtreme within the client-side app. If you're talking about the server-side app, I believe you can try it. Contact our support team. We're working on verifying exactly. Now, people saying, what about, can you take your existing ASP.NET products and so forth? There are certain things that we can't, and I talked about this in the ASP.NET webinar. For example, some of our libraries leverage GDI and the graphics library, and that doesn't exist yet on ASP.NET Core. So ASP.NET Core just came out. They're still developing it. In fact, they've already got plans. If you look at the roadmap, they've already got plans to change it. And that's because even they got version 1.0 out, they're going to have some things that are going to be changing from what version 1.0 is out for. So I'm excited by it. I absolutely invite you to try it. But no, you're one of the few people out there that is kind of out there in the forefront. But if you are, send me a tweet because I'm excited to see all that good stuff. And you'll find me at Mehul Harry on the Twitters. Or email me.
Is there a way to add security to the reports?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. My recommendation is add it when I created the file new project for this. So for example, if I come in here and let's say add a new project, which I got to stop this service for first. So if I right click and add a new project here, when you add the new project, and Don and I have done webinars about this in the past about how you add security to a web service. And if you take a look, and I'll show you the link in a minute, but when you were first creating this, let's say if you used this one or DevExtreme, you have an option to add security. So for example, let me use the Microsoft template for a second, just to kind of show you. Add new project and web. So when you do this, when you first select here authentication, right now I got no authentication. So for example, to do that, I gotta at a minimum select one of these project types. So let's say I made a web API MVC. Now I got some authentication here for individual user accounts. Or I can select work in school if I'm using Active Directory or Azure or something like that. But this sets you up for security. This is what says I've got the initial layer. Somebody has to log in. Now, again, there's a whole webinar that deals with this. And if you go to devexpress.com/webinars, and if you scroll down, we show you the upcoming webinars. But if you scroll all the way down and take a look at previously recorded webinars and click to see all previously recorded, please take a look at, for Don and I's webinars about I think it was in 2015, using a secure web API service from a mobile app. And in here, we do exactly that. We set up a secure web API service. And what do you need from a client-side app? Whether it's a mobile app or it's a desktop app, what kind of tokens need to be exchanged? How does that work? We dive into all of that good stuff. And maybe in a future webinar, we'll do a 2016 version, but everything we show in here still exactly applies. So please take a look for this webinar. It's also on our YouTube channel as well, which you can find at youtube.com/developerexpress.
Hey everybody, I'm Paul with DevExpress.
Awesome. All right. So that is all the time we have for questions. I think we got to all of them. Thank you, Mehul.
You're welcome, Amanda. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I had a great time, and please, I hope to hear from you on the social or email.
And that is it for this one. Thank you so much to Mehul. Thank you all for joining us, and of course, thank you for choosing DevExpress. Bye-bye.